When Dr. Gill invited me to do a study on Revelation, I have to admit I was a little bit fearful. I have avoided this genre, treating it with sort of a pan-tribulationist approach. Everything I don't understand will ultimately pan out in the end. There are many misconceptions of what apocalyptic literature is and what it's not, what it was designed to do. And if, like me, you prefer to leave the genre well enough alone, I hope to allay your fears and communicate the hope behind this body of text. If you're into reading dates in the newspaper with the Bible open, I hope you'll dialogue with me, as together we delve into a body of literature which at once is cryptic as it is arresting and beautiful. From the book 88 Reasons Why Jesus is Coming Back in 1988 to Harold Camping's prediction of Judgment Day on May 21st, 2011, my lifetime has been filled with a variety of methodologically unsound prophetic teachings of the end times. My first serious study of apocalyptic literature outside personal devotions was when our youth group asked our pastor to teach us Revelation. After reluctantly agreeing, our youth pastor picked up his Revelation unveiled, and following a few rounds of Mad Libs, one Sunday morning we began our study. The only thing I remember about the lessons was the Humorsian, the human horse lion a classmate drew in response to the beast of Revelation 9. Between my Sunday school introduction and the occasional sermon about how terrible things would be for the godless if one was left behind, I developed trepidation, mixed with a bit of fear, when approaching biblical apocalyptic literature. It's hoped that this study may begin to connect these flawed assumptions with actual truth and provide the reader and the hearer with tools instead of trepidation, and maybe instead of fear, confident hope in the author of biblical apocalypse. There have been many shifting views. You might see those in a following slide. We will begin with what biblical apocalyptic literature is not. It's not tea leaves or a crystal ball. It's not a body of literature designed to give us the day or the hour when Jesus is supposed to return. For Matthew 24:36 says, "No man knows the day or the hour." Here are a few texts which highlight some of the interpretations that have been popularized in the recent past. Dwight Wilson's Armageddon Now, The Millennial Maze is a chapter from Stanley Grenz, and I love this last title, The Last Days Are Here Again, by Richard Kyle. I'm grateful to Craig Keener, his book on Revelation, for pointing me to these sources. These sources are entertaining, however, I'm not a skeptic. But along with Leland Ryken, I do believe it may be appropriate to read certain symbolic passages with an eye on the news. But before you weigh in on that point, let's get to the characteristics of apocalyptic literature. We will begin with a working definition, which we might tweak as we go along, and then look into some specific characteristics. Apocalyptic literature may be defined as a revelatory message within a narrative framework, frequently imparted through a dream or vision to a human recipient, often mediated through an angelic being, regarding the ultimate future, yet in view of the past, during a present time of crisis, which has the effect of encouraging perseverance of the righteous in the face of foreign domination, and gives hope in light of the sovereignty of God. Simply put, an apocalypse is an unveiling or uncovering of something previously hidden, a revelation or a disclosure, a composite of the Greek words apo, from, and kalypto, conceal or cover. It's the first word of the Apostle John's seminal work on the end, from which, by way of Latin, comes the English title Revelation. Although not used with great theological impact in the Septuagint, this term does take a significant role in the New Testament. For example, the word kalupto was meant to denote something like removing the lid off of the ark, or Saul upbraiding Jonathan for having exposed the nakedness of your mother. But it soon came to disclose a hidden truth, especially something regarding God. And we find in the New Testament, apocalyptic literature focuses on the second coming or presence of Christ as its cosmic end. He will judge the wicked, exonerate and rescue the righteous, and restore the creation by means of a new heaven and new earth, bringing about an end time as it is now understood. Beginning with the first 2 points, a revelatory message to a human recipient. Both the prophetic and apocalyptic genres are included under this umbrella of revelatory messages given divinely to human recipients. And recognizing the similarities between these literature groups is another valuable tool for understanding apocalyptic literature. Unlike prophecy, however, apocalyptic revelations are frequently given with a command to write and a command to speak. All of these items of definition will help you to be able to identify apocalyptic literature. The increased appearance of angels and demons is another key to identifying apocalyptic literature. References to demonic powers involved in human affairs, as well as angelic powers. And John Collins notes in his seminal works on biblical apocalyptic literature the mediating factor that angelic beings have, how they will come alongside the person receiving the vision and explain it in a more clear and concise way. We see this in Daniel chapter 10, verse number 14. Also in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, where it says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him the revelation which God gave him to show to his bondservants the things which must soon take place. And he sent and communicated it by his angel to his bondservant John. Notice I've highlighted the first word apocalypsis, as well as the word angelou, or angel, so that you can see those in the original Greek text. Getting back to our definition, we have the elements of past, present, and future. Here I put future first, as I think it's the most important use in apocalyptic literature. However, the present time of crisis also plays a big role. In light of this, review of the biblical and extra-biblical literature surrounding these texts is imperative. As an aid to understanding the apocalyptic elements in the Gospels or the book of Revelation, it's helpful to understand the Jewish history after the restoration to the Promised Land under Ezra and Nehemiah, and before the Roman occupation during Jesus' day. Reading or rereading at least these books, as well as the last chapter of 2 Chronicles, and excerpts from the book of the Maccabees and Josephus' Wars of the Jews, are helpful to understand the mindset behind a large body of apocalyptic texts. In a slightly varied but similar way, one may be assisted in discerning the thought processes of the apocalyptic elements in the prophetic literature, including Daniel, through a brief historical overview of the principal pressures facing the divided monarchy before the fall of Samaria in 722 BC and Jerusalem in 586. For this, someone might want to review 2 Chronicles and, again, Josephus' Wars of the Jews. Though this step may seem pedantic, without at least a cursory knowledge of the times, such literature will be an enigma. It would be easy to overlook or find confusing the weight of importance that things such as cosmic battles, wars between good and evil, that these types of elements possess for the apocalyptic mind. When you're talking with an oppressed people group, these are going to be heavy in the forefront of the mind. In addition to historical knowledge, another important element in interpreting biblical apocalyptic literature is identifying its key characteristics. You know you're dealing with apocalyptic literature when you encounter things such as symbols, end things, use of numbers and time, and two ages. Symbols. These exist in reality or fantasy, but are doing double duty, and they represent one or several additional items or concepts. For example, in the United States, the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of peace and freedom. As a gift from France, it also represents the alliance between two countries after the Revolutionary War. Thus, the context and way in which a symbol is illustrated may have bearing on its meaning. In the biblical text, as in other literature, some symbols stay constant between genres and testaments, while others are reinterpreted over time. Because of the open-ended nature of symbols, Ryken suggests that it's appropriate to seek both ancient and modern fulfillments of apocalyptic symbols. For example, the Statue of Liberty. Use of numbers, or time. In biblical apocalyptic literature, numbers frequently play a significant role as symbolic features. The term numerology, however, carries unnecessary baggage, such as superstitions and predictions that will not be used. So I won't be using that term in this paper, but there are a lot of mysterious numbers in apocalyptic literature, such as the number 666, defined as the number of man in Revelation 13, or the 7 heads and 10 horns of Daniel 7. Stock phrases, such as 7 being the number of perfection, 70 years, a number of completion, multiples of 12, such as the 12 tribes and the 144,000. Lots and lots of numbers. Both Jewish and Christian apocalyptic literature center thematically on the struggle between good and evil. Such a conflict may garner labels such as light versus darkness, God versus Satan, or heaven versus hell. Beyond simple acts that are moral or immoral, these struggles illustrate a challenge to righteousness from outside forces, whether physical or spiritual. All apocalyptic battle stories, whether the actors are named directly or indirectly, ultimately reduce the participants to one of these two sides. This clarifying of roles permits the reader to gain confidence in both the sovereignty of God and the ultimate triumph of good over evil. Similar to this is the division between the present world, generally a world in crisis, and the world to come, a golden age, or period of universal peace. As D.S. Russell designates it, it's a teaching of two ages. There are many additional characteristics we could cover. A few that I would like to highlight that struck me as quite interesting are the grotesque, the surreal, and the horrible. Apocalyptic literature frequently incorporates arresting imagery and surreal techniques. These two elements elicit feelings of discomfort and thoughts that the literature is just incomprehensible. But rather than dismiss these natural reactions, one may benefit from embracing the strangeness. Were the ugly, festering sores that came upon those who had the mark of the beast in Revelation 16:2 unsettling? They should be. What about an agony so great that it causes people to gnaw their tongue? One ought to be repulsed by what Leland Ryken categorizes as literary techniques that are grotesque. Both poetic and apocalyptic literature frequently employ such images, and they're designed to provoke the reader. Often to provoke the reader to action. In our classroom discussion, we will pause here and look through exercise 1. You may work through this exercise on your own. Please note your observations to the following passage and see how you respond. Juxtaposed against this horrible, ugly, and beautiful, horrible and ugly is a beautiful, a glorious, and a good. There's a glorious age, a golden age, or a denouement, a return to how things were and how things, the new normal of how things ought to be. The glorious, we see a woman clothed with the sun and the moon in the book of Revelation. Under her feet has a crown of 12 stars on her head, and a symbolic use of cosmic images to note the glory, as if the house of Israel were become the birthplace of the Messiah. The Golden Age, a feature of many prophetic apocalyptic texts, we find an image of hope. Apart from the Day of the Lord imagery, apocalyptic imagery in the prophetic texts also exhibits what Ryken calls Golden Age visions, or more commonly times of peace and restoration. In the New Testament, this is called a period of the eschaton. Thus, in the grand narrative of the biblical story, apocalyptic literature fulfills the denouement, or the return to the new normal, of a supernaturally accomplished restoration of the rule and reign of God. One might think of Isaiah's wolf and the lamb image, or Zechariah 8, 3 through 5. A significant body of apocalyptic material may be classified as either apocalyptic or proto-apocalyptic. A significant body of prophetic material as apocalyptic or either proto-apocalyptic. Using broad brush definition, the scope of biblical apocalyptic extends beyond Revelation in Daniel 7 through 9 and includes several passages from prophetic literature such as the Day of the Lord, Yom Yahweh, images in Ezekiel and Joel, as well as visions of the New Jerusalem in Ezekiel, and Messianic age in Isaiah and Deutero-Zechariah. As Murphy aptly notes, both the prophets of Israel and apocalyptic writers concern themselves with eschatology. For this reason, Ryken is comfortable including a class of prophetic apocalyptic writings in his classification of apocalyptic texts. Russell suggests that not only Joel 3 and Zechariah 9 through 14, but also Zephaniah 1:5 be included in this designation. While Frederick Murphy perceives apocalyptic elements in nearly every book of the Bible. One should be aware that there is quite a bit of debate about the origin of apocalyptic texts, and a helpful introduction is Stephen Cook's seminal work Prophecy and Apocalypticism, the Post-Exilic Social Setting. For further reading on the development of apocalyptic literature as it relates to the post-exilic prophets, you may want to look into Paul Hansen, The Dawn of Apocalyptic. His thesis of prophetic origin is in direct conflict with Gerhard von Rad, his proclamation of new genre, which is completely unrelated, or Martin Buber's assumptions of complete discontinuity, without even any religious value. Well, in one sense, I agree with Murphy's pedantic, careful use that each particular book of the Bible has some element of apocalyptic in it. At some point, the usefulness of a definition breaks down if everything is included. So, while I agree that the final judgment of the righteous and the wicked are both apocalyptic elements, such things by themselves do not make an apocalyptic text, but should be seen in combination with other features. From the initial publication of First Enoch in 1821 to the insights gained through access to additional manuscript discoveries, such as the increased accessibility of the Dead Sea Scrolls, especially the War Scroll, other epigraphic discoveries have expanded the ability of scholars to conduct lower criticism, and in light of these discoveries, scholarship has frequently adjusted the canon of apocalyptic texts. I already mentioned the interpretation on the popular level, but the canon is what seems to be changing on the scholarly level. One example of this may be seen in the number and type of texts which are included as, quote, apocalyptic, unquote. Although defining texts which are considered apocalyptic is beyond the scope of this paper, the fruitfulness in a labor like this permits individuals to grasp commonalities and similarities across the corpora. There are several helpful places that you can locate this material, and I have included these in my paper. You may also want to look into the SBL Genre Project, published by Semia in 1979. Collins also wrote on Apocalypse, the morphology of the genre. Specifically, that article is very helpful. I'd like to leave us with two final thoughts regarding biblical apocalyptic literature. There are responsible ways to apply the genre, and there are knee-jerk reactions. You can throw it all out as a knee-jerk reaction. It doesn't make sense. It's too controversial. I don't want to touch it. However, I think that if we responsibly approach the material to preach or teach, we're going to find two key imperatives. The imperative to hope in what God is doing, hope in the future, and the imperative to be ready, a warning. Although the genre may appear intimidating, if you take a step back and look at it as a whole, understand the overlapping features it shares with prophecy, and allow for a little bit of ambiguity in the interpretation of symbols, the genre becomes demystified. While many attempts at apocalyptic dating and naming have proved unsound, this shouldn't prohibit one from reading the literature as foretelling modern events. However, to limit these texts to their foretelling components alone misses the larger applications of trust in divine help and preparation for future judgment. Don't avoid the genre, but let it serve as a model. Break ground, demonstrate good hermeneutics, and proclaim the grace and the sovereignty of God.